What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome on in to the PWTorch Fireside Chat for Monday, January 2nd, 2023, which is insane to say. Just unbelievable. What's going on? Hopefully, everybody had a really safe new year and happy holidays. I'm PWTorch Assistant Editor Zack Heydorn. And with me today, what we figured out is now 4 years running, Chris Samsa from Sport of Pro Wrestling. Chris, this is your time to shine, my friend. This is your time of year. Wrestle Kingdom 17. Glad to have you. Welcome into the show, man.
Thank you, Zach. It's a tradition now. We were saying like that's a cool thing, and I hope it goes on for many more years. But yeah, I really have two seasons in the pro wrestling world, and it's Wrestle Kingdom season and G1 season. So I try to make the rounds and say hello to all my friends during that time, and make sure people are caught up on New Japan. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking the time to be here, man. I know you're busy during this time, but it's a really interesting show this year for a lot of reasons. You know, for one thing, it's back down to one night from two nights, which is
That's a good thing.
Which is a good thing. So I thought about like starting off, hey, what do you think of the going back from two nights to one night? And I was like, no, that's a pointless question. We pretty much know how Chris is going to answer that. But I think more so than that, I mean, Wrestle Kingdom 17 with all the pieces that the show has. I mean, it's got a main event, Okada versus Jay White, like a rivalry New Japan main event. And then it's got a lot of like different components, like more mainstream components than it has had in quite some time, with Kenny Omega's return, wrestling Will Ospreay, the Sasha Banks rumors as to, her appearing at some point during Wrestle Kingdom. Like there's just a lot of kind of extra oomph on this year's show, in my opinion. What do you make of that? And is there a business strategy that you see in terms of them booking the show the way that they did?
Sure. Yeah. So the company's been clear. Clear as day. They have two objectives, and one is kind of a youth movement within the talent, and the other is Western, like rebuilding the Western fan base. That, I mean, it's a pre-existing thing, right? They're not building it from scratch. But I think, they don't say this, but what I look at it as rebuilding the Western fan base to its peak in a post AEW world, right? So like finding their lane in a world where AEW also exists, where you're not just the alternative to WWE anymore. You're also you're like a co-alternative with AEW, right? And then finding their lane within that, right? So, and those two things I think are coming to a head here, and Wrestle Kingdom's really the launch point. I think, as in an annual calendar, Wrestle Kingdom's kind of the end of last year, right? Even though we have crossed over into January, obviously every year, but it's the culmination of everything that happened in 2022. This year, it feels a lot more like it's the beginning of something. So, and with that said, obviously the main event doesn't necessarily speak to that, because this is an existing, feud grudge match that's going to go on forever with Okada and Jay White. But everything else on the card speaks to probably one of those two priorities, and being kind of the English speaking audience, as well as a youth movement within the card. So we're seeing some guys get elevated. We're seeing a women's title defended in a singles match in the Tokyo Dome. We've got AEW representation. We have very technically WWE representation, and we don't need to dissect the Carl Anderson thing any further than that, but he's employed by WWE and he's going to be on this show. And that's something, right? So New Japan for a long time operated a little bit in their own bubble, and I think they've seen the growth of AEW as a reason to kind of stop doing that, and to really work closely with their sister company Stardom, as well as, obviously the relationship with AEW is really strong, but also to not just kick Carl Anderson to the curb when they wanted him for this role, even though WWE is his employer now. So so the business strategies are pretty clear to me. And I think that that's a good thing to kind of put out there. What I've said a couple times is that I think they looked at Wrestle Kingdom in 2018 when Chris Jericho came in, and that was really a big moment of growth for them. And they're trying to replicate that in a couple of different ways. And I don't know if you can ever replicate that entirely, but there's definitely some attempts here, and there's a lot of parallels, especially with that Kenny Omega Will Ospreay match.
There definitely is. And you mentioned the main event, so we'll start things there, because I think if you're New Japan and you have the goals that you just outlined, and which I agree with. I mean, that you can see that on this card, and they've said as much in certain instances. I also think it's really important to balance something like that, like balance that vision and that strategy with like an anchor. This is our company type of match in a big time spotlight. And I think like Jay White versus Okada really, I think, just is that to a T at this point in time. Like, this is a very much a New Japan main event, an IWGP World Heavyweight title match, like two of the biggest stars that they have colliding. And yes, we've kind of been there, done that with these guys, a lot, but that's par for the course, in New Japan. You see these guys wrestle each other more often, than maybe you're used to in major matches than you'd be used to in WWE or AEW. And so I like this kind of as an anchor to the show that still reminds everybody what the company is and who it's about. And so I give this main event a thumbs up. Like, I've seen it like take some heat in some certain circles, but like, I think on this show, with all that's going on, this match makes a hell of a lot of sense. And for that reason, I give it a thumbs up. They've told a good story. It's like your traditional G1 winner who's going into Wrestle Kingdom to reclaim the title. There's not a lot of bells and whistles here, Chris, but I like it for what it is and for what it is on this show in particular. Talk about the main event a little bit. Talk about the history of these guys and just your thoughts on this being the main event for such an important show for the company.
Yeah. I mean, history-wise, these guys have been intertwined for a very long time. Back to when Jay White was not the leader of Bullet Club, he had joined Chaos with the intention of taking over the unit from Okada. This was right after Jay White came back from his excursion after he kind of graduated from being a young lion. So these guys, Jay White has been one of those guys that we knew was going to be Kazuchika Okada's, number one foil for a very long time. And here we are finally getting that in a main event at the Tokyo Dome. So I see the same stuff you do in certain circles, and probably even in different circles, that people are criticizing this main event as being cold or having no build, or, Jay wasn't on the road to Tokyo Dome shows, so they didn't have that kind of classic last interaction that you would normally see. But my thought on that is, what more do you need? Right? Like, what more do you, what is a stare down going to give you that, 6 years, 7 years of history isn't already giving you?
Yes.
And not that we necessarily at New Japan, like, not that necessarily they expect everyone to know everything, but also the other thing is the Tokyo Dome main event is classically the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion versus the G1 winner. Here we are. Like, again, even if these guys didn't have years on years of history, what more do you need? Right? Like, that's the classic main event. And, look back to say when the G1 started in like the 90s and the early 2000s, and like, was there a major stare down to build people up to Wrestle Kingdom? Probably not. Maybe there's a picture on Pro Wrestling Weekly in Japan of the final stare down, but I don't think that's necessary, right? So I think that's a lot of that is criticism in bad taste, you know, when you're looking at it, or just lack of knowledge. You know, new fans would want more of that, I suppose, but that's why people like me exist, to run out here and be like, this is how things work here, right? Like I want people to know that, and if that's not for them, then that's okay, I guess. But objectively, the match in the ring, no one's gonna care about the build to it, or the you know, the false criticisms of the build to it once this match hits the ring, and especially after the final bell rings, because these are two pros who have both done this before. Okada's in his 10th main event in the Tokyo Dome, which is incredible given the fact that I'm pretty sure he's 36, 37, somewhere in there. It's insane. And Jay White, still incredibly young, in now his second official main event in the Tokyo Dome. And that's kind of his hump to get over, is to win a main event in the Tokyo Dome. So, you know, that's the story here. And I don't know that it needs much more than that. And you're right. It's an anchor for the company. These guys, like, they, regardless of what happens in the double main event before this with Okada and Ospreay, which will be a totally different type of match. Regardless of what happens there, this match is going to deliver, and it's going to deliver in a way that they needed to deliver in the Tokyo Dome, which is a stage that not everyone can deliver on.
Absolutely. As far as you mentioned, Jay White needing to kind of get over that hump. And well, first of all, I definitely agree as far as the build goes. Like, sometimes less is more, you know, and you can dilute hype if you try to feed it too much. And with this, like, the story kind of tells itself. Plus, there's a lot of other things on this card that needed time to build itself up more than this match did. So I think it's okay in this regard. Now, Jay White, you said, hey, he's got to overcome that hump and win his first Wrestle Kingdom Tokyo Dome main event. Is now the time for that to happen? Like, do you, where do you see this match going from a finish standpoint? You know, given the stakes, I mean, like, it's I think you can make good arguments both ways here, but who's going to walk away with this one, Chris?
So I look this Wrestle Kingdom, and I don't know if I've mentioned it just now on the air or not, but there's so many parallels to 2018, when in the main event in Japan was Okada and Naito, but the main event in the rest of the world was Jericho and Kenny Omega, right? So Okada and Naito, everyone looked at that match and said, this is Naito's moment. Naito's going to win the title finally in the Tokyo Dome. He's going to win that main event, and it's going to be great, right? That's not what happened. Okada won. He retained at the end of that match, and everyone thought nobody thought that's how that was going to go. That was a shock. So does that parallel carry over, and would it carry as much weight if Jay White is the guy to walk out of the Tokyo Dome with the title? I don't know. I don't think so, but it would be just as shocking. I think the easy play is that Okada wins, tribute to Inoki, right? That there's a lot of Inoki tribute stuff happening still. This is kind of the final time that New Japan will get to kind of pay tribute to their founder. And then I think if Okada wins, what I will say is someone's got to walk out of that on that stage and challenge, and they need to move forward. I think if Okada wins and the show fades to black with just him holding the belt with the confetti falling, I don't know if that's enough to carry people over. I think you need some sort of surprise at the end of the show. And if the surprise is Jay White wins, I think that's enough. But if the surprise is Okada wins and nobody challenges, I don't know if that carries over. So that's my way of kind of hedging, I think. I think if I had to bet, I think I'm higher on the fact that Jay White could walk out of this as a winner than most people that I've talked to. But I think if I really needed to buckle down and place a bet, it would be that Okada's going to win, but someone interesting might challenge afterwards.
Interesting. Any inkling as to who that might be?
No inkling, but I have three that I would want to see that would really, really hype me up for wherever and whenever. Katsuyori Shibata.
Oh yeah.
Kota Ibushi, if they've smoothed things over, that would be a fascinating way for him to re-enter. And I mean, there's a man in the building that everyone wants to see wrestle Okada one more time.
Yeah.
Kenny Omega,
Kenny
right?
Omega,
and I don't know how you get there after probably a crazy match with Will Ospreay to the point where he walks out and he's like, me next. But that, who doesn't want that match?
Yeah. That's where my head went. Just if you're gonna, I don't know. It's like they're in the building.
You almost this
you
is one of those.
to.
I'll go back to everything I said about Jay White and Okada. I think you need those two guys to be in the same place on camera. I mean, at some point, right? And maybe it's not here. Maybe it's the next night at New Year's Dash. I don't know, right? But depending on Kenny's health after he tries to die against Will Ospreay.
Right.
I mean, like that's like I don't know how you get from that match to walking out at the end of the Dome. My other two, Shibata, if he can wrestle and he challenges Okada, I mean, if they're going to let him wrestle again in a New Japan ring, that would be an incredible moment for the crowd there, as well as for the fan base. And obviously the Ibushi thing, he, the last time we saw Ibushi in a New Japan ring, he was, he had blown his shoulder out in a match against Okada. So that would be an easy play if they've smoothed things over. And I think, listeners probably understand there's some drama there.
Yeah. I mean, it would take quite a bit to like,
that would probably be actually the most surprising.
Yes. I'm going to go, man, you kind of got me rethinking my pick here. I had like Jay White. I kind of thought this was his time, just for some reason, it felt like a good time to do that. So I'll stick with that, but you make a very compelling argument with Okada winning and someone walking out to challenge. Because the other thing I think you have to remember here too is, I don't know the business of this show right now. I would imagine that with the Sasha Banks stuff and Omega and Ospreay, they have more eyes on it than the last handful of years. And you want to, as you mentioned, keep them,
right?
Give people a reason to hang on to that New Japan subscription and whatnot, or just stay interested. And so like a hook like that at the end of this show in particular makes a lot of sense. So you make a compelling argument, but for consistency's sake, I'll say Jay White, just for the reasons you outlined. Just it's kind of, I mean, it feels like it's time. It feels like it's time.
It's time, and it's a good shock, right? Like I think that's Jay White. The last time he was in the Tokyo Dome main event was against Kota Ibushi a couple of years ago, and they had, just a fantastic match. Also, the longest Tokyo Dome match of all time in professional wrestling, and that's kind of Jay's thing. And he that in that moment, that was when he went off backstage and had a great promo, and everyone got really intrigued by what he was going to do next. And it felt like a moment for him, a turning point. It didn't turn out that way. When it really comes down to it, Jay White's kind of still in the same place. Yeah. So, but maybe he needs to, he's beaten Okada. He's 4-1 against Okada in singles matches. So like, it's not Okada is his white whale. It's the Tokyo Dome main event. And then you add in that Okada is such a strong, kind of end boss. It does kind of make sense if you want Jay White to go further than he already has, which is, as far as a lot of people think he could go. If you want him to go further as a star in both in professional wrestling and in New Japan Pro Wrestling, I think he wins this. Yeah. So it is I think it's probably a matter of the relationship with Jay and what that looks like going forward. And if that's strong still, I have no issue leaving that belt on him and kind of surprising people.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we talked about it. We mentioned it in passing, but we also have a major co-main event, a match that could be the main event for all intents and purposes on any pay-per-view, really. Will Ospreay versus Kenny Omega for the IWGP United States Championship. This is a big one. I mean, this is just a big match, and it has the build that this version of Okada and White doesn't have. I think that they've done as good of a job as you can in terms of building a match in the New Japan environment where you don't have like these weekly shows feeding these matches. And but they told a long-term story here. Ospreay and Omega have been, back and forth for quite some time, in terms of just verbal jabs. You have an angle that played out, I believe it was at Forbidden Door where where was it that the Elite just got beat up by United Empire?
So they were in the trios tournament. So it was
maybe
around,
that's what it was.
It was around that time.
Okay.
And they had a match.
Yes.
Within the trios tournament. That was in Chicago, I think. I don't think that was one that I was like, I should go to that. And I was like, I'm so tired.
Yes. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So, but you have the building blocks here for this. And then you just have the fact that both these guys are just top-notch performers, and the in-ring is just going to be completely insane. And then a third layer, Kenny Omega's return to New Japan. I mean, that, can't go understated here either. Like, you have kind of like the prodigal son returning. And I think he's got the right opponent. I think he's in the right position, on the card. I think he's just in the perfect spot for a return to this company on this show. This has the makings of a classic, Chris. Talk about it. Talk about these two guys and just what this match means for the show and for the company.
Yeah, I mean, you can't ask for much more than putting Will Ospreay and Kenny Omega in the ring in a singles match. So, again, another one of those matches that just like it didn't need everything they did for it, but I'm sure glad that they did what they did. So, Omega is a pro when it comes to like an interview setting and building up a match. I mean, he's so good at it. And part of that is I think that's his element, where he can be a little more thoughtful and go on and on and on, and honestly cross a lot of lines when he's sitting across from someone, as opposed to like an in-ring promo. Yeah. And so the interview that he did that's on NJPW1972.com, like if you read it kind of in his voice, I mean, he's a bad man. And, he's taken that role and taking the role of saying, like, I left this company to you, Will, and look at where you are now. And I think, raising the hood a little bit on the New Japan business kind of faltering a little bit through COVID, that's a move too that New Japan, I mean, historically New Japan would rarely have done. But Kenny's like, listen, like, that's the story here. The story is I left and y'all fell off. A pandemic helped. So I mean, there's some, creative liberties there, but Kenny says all that. Will started this a long time ago, both via Twitter and different podcasts and appearances. And I think, they were always building towards this moment. And, the fact that Kenny Omega, AEW talent, is giving this match to New Japan, with Will Ospreay first. Yep. I think that's a big thing to mention too. That's maybe getting skirted under the rug a little bit just because of how big the match is. But the fact that this match is happening in New Japan, it had to. The story is about New Japan. But, the stories are out there that the leadership at AEW is really protective of getting matches first or making sure they get them on the biggest stage. And this is the biggest stage that this match could happen on, and it's happening here first. And I think that's the right move. And that's that's to say something kind about both sides of that equation, because, if this is the trade-off for, say, Forbidden Door, that's a pretty solid trade, because this is a match that I think my metrics are all up, in my season, right? Like all of my views and tweets and all that stuff, like interest is up for this Wrestle Kingdom comparatively to the last two, at least. It's not quite to 2020 or, late 2019, early 2020 levels, but people are hyped for this particular match. And part of it is just that these guys are going to go out there and they're going to do some wild stuff that no one's ever seen before. And if they don't, then they're just, even if they don't try to like literally die in or out of the ring, they're going to put on a hell of a classic. And I think we're looking at two matches that in a year from now, we might be looking at as, 1 and 1A for match of the year contenders for double main events at the Tokyo Dome. And that's the classic Tokyo Dome thing, right? Like you put these matches out there and you're like, all right, everyone, come on down. Try to catch up.
Yeah. And I mean, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I don't know that I can add too much more to that. Just the idea that the match is happening in New Japan, I think is important. And I think it does tell you that it's probably not the last time they're going to wrestle this year. So I think that's, worth keeping in mind, that this is probably the first of two for sure, maybe three.
Yeah.
Depending on how it goes. The Will Ospreay, like his position in New Japan. I mean, Kenny Omega's telling a story with this, of course. Like, I left New Japan to you and blah blah blah. We know the story, but how much reality is in what Omega says for Ospreay, in terms of like he flirted with some big time spots, on the Wrestle Kingdom shows, delivered, I think, really solid matches. But I don't know, and argue back if you think I'm incorrect, but he still doesn't seem like he's on the level of like a Jay White or an Okada at this point. It's like they're up here and he's like 1B, in terms of star power, just in my eyes. And I don't really know what it is. But do you think that there's room for him to grow as a star and kind of get up to that Okada level, or do you think that he's already there?
I think the level that I look at is Jay White's level, because I think that's the foreign talent top spot. And I think not that that's his ceiling necessarily, because he's so talented and he's so young.
Right.
So, and he's got such a cachet already. So, but Will took a different path there, right? So Jay White came in and now he's the leader of Bullet Club. Like that happened. And Jay White, that was Jay's elevation. He just took over, the most successful merchandise mover pretty much of all time in pro wrestling in Bullet Club. So immediately he's a guy. Will Ospreay built his own thing, United Empire, and started to recruit some guys. And I know that that's Will's group, right? Like that's not New Japan saying, here's a bunch of guys and I want you to lead this. Like Will recruited Aussie Open and TJP, and that's at least my perception of it, and based on what I've talked to people about. So Will's taking a different path to establish something new, and I think that in that way, Will is the guy that more speaks to the future priorities of New Japan as opposed to just leveraging what already existed. And I think that takes a little bit more time, a little bit more creativity, and a little bit more trust from the company, for that matter. Will famously said he signed a 5-year deal with New Japan. He's also recently said that he's really happy with his role in New Japan. And I mean, how could you not be? He's been a top title holder. He's holding the U.S. championship now. He's always involved in stories. He gets to have matches against some of the best in the world. And then, essentially they're bringing back Kenny Omega to face him. But Will's path to that top foreign talent spot is way different from Jay White. Not at this point, they are kind of 1 and 1A, and we're seeing that as they bounce back and forth between being in Tokyo Dome main event pictures, which last year Will was in this kind of the Jay White spot, in a totally different way with the 2 nights and the 2 belts and all that. But that was a good story too. So. And a fantastic match with Okada, right? So, the path has been different. So, and Will has kind of diverged away from the path that Kenny Omega took, which is why I don't know that Kenny's specific criticisms, though storyline, I don't know that they hold a lot of water, because Will's doing something different. And I think United Empire is starting to catch, and I think it has started to catch. And, this is only going to help Will, going in there against Kenny Omega and having a match that people are going to just go wild for, in all likelihood. I think this is just one more step up for Will Ospreay to become a guy, and also establishing the U.S. title as the clear number 2, the clear number 2 title, where that Intercontinental title used to live. This is that next up, like heavyweights that are main eventers that don't have anything to do in the main event right now, they're going to go after that US title. And that's a big piece too. Because that's essentially what Kenny Omega had done for this title when it debuted.
Right.
So, you know, again, going back to that 2017, 2018 kind of time frame when things were really, really growing, we're still leveraging some of the same tools. And I think that that's kind of a neat parallel.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. So Omega returning to New Japan, my thought is that you want him to win this first one. Of course, you can make an argument the other way, but I'm going to take Kenny Omega here as a means to, you know, make the, you know, kind of like just give the return stamp of approval. You know, you kind of get that feel good moment, and then, you know, obviously you're going to build to another match down the road. But like, you kind of have a scenario. If Omega wins this, you have Omega kind of beating Ospreay almost on his quote unquote turf, you know, and then you can flip that around at Forbidden Door sometime over the summer. But I think in order to tell because if Ospreay wins, it's like, okay, story over, kinda, you know, like, and so I think this has a couple more chapters left in it. And I think the best way to get there is to go with Omega. There's a lot of other factors at play, but I'm taking Omega here. How about you?
Part of it is probably how much access does New Japan have to Kenny Omega? Because if it's just a little bit, then maybe there's something else they want him to do. I think the next Omega Okada match will happen in America though. So I don't know that this is the place to start that build unless that's all we've got, right? Unless you've got one unless that's the trade, right? We'll give you Kenny Omega versus Will Ospreay in the Tokyo Dome. You give us Kenny Omega versus Kazuchika Okada in the US, right? If that's the 1-to-1, then I think Kenny's got to lose. But I kind of doubt that that's the case. I think that relationship with AEW is really strong and only strengthening. So I agree with you that I think this is the time for Kenny to win. It also babyfaces Will, and I think that's Will Ospreay toes the line where they've now become United Empire started as this like mega heel group, and now they're tweeners. They they're in that old LIJ slot where they're like, are we bad? We're bad when we're against Chaos, but we're good when we're against Bullet Club, you know? And like, I think that United Empire is in that space right now where they're in the middle, and, you know, in Japan, then Will Ospreay probably becomes, you know, the fiery baby face. And I think that'll probably be his role in this match too. Whereas then, you know, otherwise Will still has this like heel leaning thing. So, and I think they probably want to move United Empire kind of over that hump into the babyface side of things where they're representing New Japan here. And then the outsiders are coming in to try to fight them. So I agree. And I also think Kenny Omega walking around with the US title, kind of similar to when Jon Moxley did on, say, AEW TV or whatever, like that's big, right? Especially now that title is, you know, the clear number 2 and was in the double main event of the Tokyo Dome. Like that's the belt. That's the belt that's going to travel the world a little bit more than, ironically, the world championship.
Yeah. It's going to be a good match. Last question. I mean, with all the expectations, you know, I mean, let's talk expectations. You know, this match, you know, part of you can worry that it's going to be a victim of the expectations that it has.
Yeah.
I'm kind of past that though. I think these two guys are so talented that they're going to make this. They're going to make this work. And I think that the expectations are high, but I just don't see them not delivering. I mean, where are you at on that? Or has expectations for this match grown, you know, too much where they can't deliver, or can they hit a home run?
I mean, I could never say that these two guys can't deliver on whatever expectations exist. Honestly, even without each other. I mean, I've watched 6 trios matches with the same 6 guys, including Kenny Omega, on AEW television, and I'm pretty sure all 6 of those matches delivered. Right? So like, and when you look at something like that and the creativity it takes to do essentially 7 matches with the same group of people like Kenny Omega's doing on AEW television these days, that's a lot. That's a lot of expectations to live up to. And, honestly, like, I'm looking at match of the year type stuff, and I'm starting to see people post their top 10s or their match of the year lists. And it's not out of the question that Will Ospreay someone could put together a top 10 match of the year list from 2022, and Will Ospreay would be in every single match. Like, it's not at all out of the question. And honestly, you don't even know which 10, right? Because he had like 30 matches that could possibly be in there, depending on how it resonated with you. So, yes, the expectations are high, and the stage is big. But when it really comes down to it, like, unless you have some like galaxy brained expectations that this is literally going to be the only pro wrestling match that anyone should ever watch because it's that good, it's going to hit. And, my concern, though, is that they know when match number 2 is already, and they're going to hold something back. But I think these are the types of guys, and we've seen it with Omega. These are the types of guys that they say, like, nah, we're not holding anything back. We're just going to figure out more to do later.
We'll figure out. Yeah.
Like,
I think so. Yeah. And I think, look, they're not stupid. They know, for the second match to be what they want it to be,
this one's got to be great.
It's got to be great. So, I think they have every reason to want to still go out and make this special. Okay. So, correct me if I'm wrong. Are fans going to be able to cheer in the?
Yes.
They will be able to cheer at this show.
Yes,
which is going to be fascinating to see.
It is, yeah. New Japan's had some cheering shows in smaller venues, a couple of Korkins, other places around Japan. This is the first, major show that's going to officially have cheering. And the president of the company and the ownership group and everyone involved is really trying to get out ahead of that and speak to, yes, you can do, even just now, like Obari tweeted, like, you can do the Naito chant during his song, Naito, Naito. Like, you can do that repetitively. Like, he's being very clear and prescriptive. Like, pretty much nothing that would happen in a pro wrestling environment is off limits. And like, they're tweeting that. It's out in Tokyo Sports. They're trying to get it out there to the world, both the viewing public as well as the people that are going to be in the building. They want to be really clear that, yes, there's still some singing restrictions with concerts and don't sing longer than the chorus and da-da-da. It's wild. I can't even dissect it all.
So crazy.
It's wild. But he's basically saying, like, please do all the cheers that you remember. And like, let's fill the Tokyo Dome with voices, though not for 3 minutes, for maybe a minute and a half. It's like, there's probably some science that somebody's leveraging. It still doesn't make a ton of sense to me, but they're really trying to get out ahead of that and say, like, cheer to your heart's content.
Well, and it's gonna make for a really cool environment because, like you said, it's been a long time since we've seen or heard cheers at a Wrestle Kingdom show.
Yeah,
like, and it matters so much. Like, even in a New Japan audience where that
it's different.
It's different anyway, but it still matters, and so it'll feel really fresh. And so I bring that up because we've got Sasha Banks rumors all around this show. You mentioned we've got Kairi defending her IWGP Women's Championship. First time ever on a Wrestle Kingdom show. Like, take a minute, Chris, and just kind of talk about Kairi, talk about that match, but then talk about how does Sasha Banks' appearance, because she's not like promoted for the show, but she's all but confirmed to be on it in some capacity. How does an appearance from Sasha Banks factor into this match, presuming it's going to happen when that match is on?
Sure. So that's the second match of the night. It's Kairi versus Tam Nakano. Kairi defending the IWGP Women's Championship for the first time ever that championship is being defended. It was established earlier this year, and then Kairi won it at the historic crossover show, which was a Stardom and New Japan crossover show. So Kairi, the US audience really familiar with Kairi after her time in WWE. As Kairi Sane, she, is back and she's with Stardom, and the assumption is that Sasha Banks, Mercedes Varnado, whatever, Mercedes Moné, whatever she's going to go by, is going to challenge for, or, appear via match number 2 here, the IWGP Women's Championship match, which on the surface is already a big deal. Just the existence of that title, first of all, is a big deal, and a shift in mentality from New Japan, Stardom, Bushiroad. And then an appearance like that, or a talent like that coming in to really establish that this is a thing that this group is serious about. I think, I think that says a lot too. So is there going to be a massive, mind-blowing reaction in the Tokyo Dome from her appearance? I don't know. Like, I don't have a read on, I guess, her the weight that she carries in Japan. Clearly, the weight that she carries in English-speaking markets, and specifically the US, is massive. And that, again, that's a lot of what this is about more than anything. But I think the Japanese audience, even if they're not all that familiar with her, I think they'll understand that she's a big deal because she carries herself that way.
Right.
Like she's going to show up and make sure everyone knows she's a big deal. And that's kind of the idea, but I don't know that that's necessarily for the audience there. I think it's for the audience on New Japan World more than anything, but I don't doubt that it's going to get a gasp if she shows up, and a major cheer and a major moment. So how do you play that? I mean, that's the question, right? How does she show up, right? Because everyone's saying she's a guarantee to be there. And I don't ever think anyone's a guarantee until they're walking down that ramp, because I don't know, like, I guess Hunter could make a phone call and up the offer. And unless the dotted line is signed, which probably would have had to have happened yesterday, unless that dotted line is signed, like, there's always a chance that something happens. This match goes off. It's great. Nothing happens. We move on. And I think that would be a little bit deflating, for a certain segment of the fan base. Like, I'm still hyped for the rest of the card, but I also am hyped for that to happen, because Kairi is awesome. I think the IWGP Women's Championship, the existence of it and the relationship with Stardom is really great for business, and it's really great progress for Japanese wrestling as a whole. And I want to see that happen, and I want to see that type of growth, and I want to see that type of growth for Stardom too, because I think it's a product that deserves that. And Sasha Mercedes, whatever, is the person to put eyes on that. And she's such a good pro wrestler too.
Yeah, she's a great fit for that.
It's I mean, how could you, once you get her in that ring, how could you go wrong? I mean, she's a wrestling nerd, and she's a super good wrestler, and this is her moment, and this is the space. And if she chose to come here and do this thing, I think that's the right decision for her career, for at least for now, right? And maybe it's one of those things where she Cody's it, and she goes out there and does everything she ever dreamed of, and then goes back and she's a bigger star. And I think maybe that's the play, or maybe she's just gonna wrestle, maybe she's gonna take the Jericho route, right?
Yep.
So I'm into it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, this feels definitely like, Kairi retains, and then you have Sasha appear, and you kind of tease that future match down the road,
right?
That's probably all you can do at this point. I don't know. I don't know if it's worthwhile to have her out there attacking Kairi or something, like some kind of angle. I think less is more with this too. Just have her out there, and she appears on Wrestle Kingdom. Like, that's okay. That's big story number 1. And then she's going to get in the ring. That's big story number 2. And there's a lot of different talent she can work with. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this plays out. Kairi had a great match at the Stardom pay-per-view about a week ago.
Oh yeah.
She's a really good opponent for Sasha, I think, out of the gate. Like, just because people in the US, like, they'll know Kyrie, like, just roughly speaking, at least. And obviously Sasha carries a major weight. And then in kind of the reverse, I think in Japan, like, when you have people know Kyrie and Sasha on the periphery, I suppose, but still enough weight to create a little bit of buzz. So I think this is a smart way to go. And then obviously there's, other major matches for her to have over there. Big ones. So are you expecting Kyrie to retain here?
Yeah, I think reason? I mean, for that reason, yeah. Unless Kyrie becomes kind of the end boss for the boss, right? Like, unless that's the play. And if that's the case, Tam Nakano is a fine fit to for Sasha to kind of buzz through and be that champion immediately. That's the thing that I don't know. Would Sasha immediately beat Kyrie? And probably, right? Like, that seems like the play. It seems like it would serve all of the priorities. But if you want to hold off on that, depending on how many dates you have with Sasha, right? Like, that's the thing. It's like everyone's talking, this is a per date deal. Probably with some exclusivity or some exclusivity clauses at least, but how many dates, right? And my question is, Sasha's going to appear at the Tokyo Dome, right? Like, we're pretty sure about that. Sasha Banks seems like the type of person that wants to wrestle in the Tokyo Dome. And kind of the question becomes, when does that get to happen? Is that a year from now, as Sasha's kind of maybe farewell from this situation? If I look at the Jericho arc, right, it was wrestle in the Tokyo Dome, Dominion, Power Struggle, Tokyo Dome again, right? Like, those were the big moments on the New Japan side. You got a little bit more to work with now because you've got some US dates that I'm sure you'd want to fill the building with Sasha. But it's tough to decipher exactly where those types of defenses are going to show up, especially in Japan, when we're not really sure what weight she's going to hold, except that she's going to clearly appear as a really big star. And but we know she can move tickets in the US. So I think Kyrie wins, and the play is you do Kyrie and Sasha. Plus, they've wrestled before. They've worked together before. Not a ton in WWE, but enough. Something like a dozen matches, 8 or 10 matches that they've both been involved in. So maybe that's a comfortable way to bring her in, and then she can figure out, wrestling in Japan, in the ring is way different than, wrestling in the US. It's not so much a dance. It's more of reading kind of the cues more than anything, and that's why the language barrier doesn't matter quite as much. So, and, Sasha, after spending some time, famously, she's been in Mexico, she's been in Japan, she's been training. I think she's probably, again, the right person to jump into that. But it probably helps that someone familiar with where Sasha came from would be her first opponent. So that's where Kyrie would come in.
Yeah. I agree. All right, cool. Well, we're going to put a bow on it there, roughly. We could spend, Chris, like another 3 hours.
Listen, I have done probably 20 hours of audio in the past week or two on various platforms. So I could go all day.
We could, yes, we could. But there's a lot of other good stuff on this show. Again, we're gonna ride off into the sunset here. But really quick, just take a couple minutes and just talk about other things of note. If someone's going to check out this show for Kenny Omega and Will Ospreay, or to see Sasha Banks, like, what are one or two other matches that people should be paying attention to that are on the lower part of the card that they may not know?
Yeah. So what I'll say is, what I know of Torch's audience and being someone that is part of the Torch audience, very US based, right? So, you'll see a lot of familiar faces. So in the first match, you'll see Lio Rush. He's going to be teaming with Yo to challenge for the IWGP Junior Heavyweight Tag Team Championship, which should be a fantastic opener against Francesco Akira and TJP, another familiar face to the US and WWE audience. Also on the card in match 3, you've got FTR, right? And we didn't even get a chance to talk about them, which is crazy that we're not even talking about FTR.
Yeah.
Defending champions here. against Hiroki Goto and Yoshihashi. So another, really familiar group of faces. Match 4, you've got Zack Sabre Jr. facing off against Ren Narita. So Zack Sabre Jr., someone who appeared in the Cruiserweight Classic back in the day, and someone who's made a name for himself in English-speaking audiences. And that's the inaugural championship match. That championship's really neat. It's a 15-minute time limit championship, and every match for that title is going to be posted onto YouTube as well as for free on New Japan World for non-subscribers. So that's pretty neat too. And then down the card further, you've got Carl Anderson defending his never openweight championship against Tama Tonga. So again,
I'm looking forward to this one. I think that's going to be a good match.
I think it's going to be, I think Bright Lights Anderson's going to show up for that one. And there's been so much criticism of him, but I think he's going to do business, and he's going to do business the right way. It's his first singles match in the Tokyo Dome. Another one of those things that's a dream, right? He's wrestled in the Tokyo Dome, but you got to figure he's going to show up for that. And then I think the only other match that I haven't crossed off is the, I guess there's probably 2 here. Oh, there's junior heavyweight championship match. It's not a lot of familiarity there for probably most of the Torch audience, but match 6 here, the Keiji Muto last match in New Japan. We've got kind of a generational trio of Shota Umino, Hiroshi Tanahashi, and Keiji Muto battling against the Los Ingobernables de Japón. So we got Naito, Sonata, and Bushi, and that's going to be a spectacle in its own way too. And I think a lot of people are really familiar with Muto. So there's familiarity across the card. And again, I think that really serves kind of where the priorities sit for New Japan right now. And I think it's a totally different card than if you look at, say, last year's Wrestle Kingdom, where it was almost all domestic talent. And this year you've got this melting pot that really New Japan, I always say New Japan's the only truly international pro wrestling company, bringing people in and going out to other parts of the world and doing their thing successfully. And I think this card really speaks to that being their identity. And I'm super excited to see that reestablished.
Yes, that's great. Great stuff, Chris. Listen, man, thank you so much for joining the show. I appreciate it. It's always great to talk New Japan and just wrestling in general with you, but talk about what you'll be doing between now and the end of January 4th. How can people follow you on social media and follow your work that you'll be doing around Wrestle Kingdom 17 moving forward? For sure.
So I'm on Twitter at the Chris Samsa. During Wrestle Kingdom, I'll be live tweeting my 20-page statistics and research document that I will have sent over to Kevin Kelly and Chris Charlton as part of my role there, as I support those guys with, facts, figures, stats, and info. They obviously won't get to all of that in the broadcast, but if that's something that helps you enjoy pro wrestling, like the facts, the actual real deal stuff that happened, ring time, wins, losses in Tokyo Dome, etc., then I definitely recommend slapping the follow button on Twitter, at least for January 4th. If you want to unfollow later, that's okay too. But yeah, so I'll have probably a thread of live tweets as each match hits the ring or as they're about to hit the ring. I'll be posting my facts and figures. Where this will live on the internet, there will be somewhere. I'm waiting to see if someone wants to post it to an official website right now before I post it. Probably the remainder of the card will get posted over at Voices of Wrestling, probably right before Wrestle Kingdom as well.
Awesome. Guys, if you're not following Chris Samsa, now's the time to do it. It's fascinating work that he does, and it adds a really fun layer to matches. So everybody give him a follow and check out his work during Wrestle Kingdom. Chris, man, thank you. Get some sleep. You're going to need it.
Never. Oh, I should say, in the Central Time Zone, which I think is like the official time zone of the Torch, the show will begin at 12:20 a.m. on Wednesday morning. That's for the pre-show, and then the full card, or the official 9-match card, will start at 2 a.m. Central Time. So I like to make sure people know their timing too.
Yes, I always send Chris a note.
Yeah.
The day before, going like, all right, hey, when's this match going to go on approximately?
See, so the problem this year is match 2 is one.
I know.
Right? So you almost have to just crack in at 2 a.m.
I know you got
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, because you're not gonna.
The news cycle will start at like 2:30 because that junior heavyweight match will be 10 minutes or so, and then say you get 15 for the women's match. So 2:30, 2:45 in the morning is probably when, if it's going to happen, that's probably when you're going to see Mercedes walk down.
It's gonna be an early morning.
It is
early morning.
Yeah, I'm already on the coffee, so here we go.
You've seen me guzzling this.
Yep.
Oh man! All right, Chris. Well, thanks a bunch. Appreciate it. Have a great Wrestle Kingdom 17, man. We'll be in touch, and thank you once again.
Thank you, Zach.